Hello everyone. We are with here Ms. Tarini Nath on our next session with Policy Matrix. So in this session, we like Tarini to answer the questions that you might have about Policy Matrix firsthand. And a little bit of information about her. She has completed her undergraduate from Ashoka University with a degree in political science, and then she went on to the London School of Economics and Political Science to complete her master's degree in public policy and administration. So my first question that I'd like to begin with would be, what led you to pursue a career in public policy after political science? And was this shift predetermined as the two subjects are really similar and interface together really well?
So to start with that, the reason I joined a liberal arts school was because I've never really been sure of what I wanted to do. It's always been trying and testing, seeing what works. In fact, I joined Ashoka with wanting to do computer science, and I did do a course in that while simultaneously doing political science, and I realized I enjoyed that more. So I didn't know I wanted to do public policy till the summer of 2018 when
Mhm.
I interned with the Ministry of External Affairs. So it was never like, oh, I this is what I want to do. This is what, eventually I'm going to do. And people used to ask me, what are you going to do after doing a degree in political science? I was doing a minor in international relations. So it was really when I did my internship with the Ministry of External Affairs, did I see how politics, government, diplomacy, all of this comes together in really interesting ways. And I realized what a difference policymakers can make. So that was what really interested me.
Right. So the second question would be like you had mentioned earlier that you're going to be working with Hindustan Unilever, and when come to think of it, it's a private company, and when people think of public policy and a private company, that doesn't sync really well. So in what ways does public policy and a private company uh, uh, intervene together with?
So, in fact, that's a really good question because even when I got the job, people were like, oh, how come you're joining Hindustan Unilever after doing public policy? Like, how is that relevant? But actually, even in my interview with Hindustan Unilever, they told me how much of an impact just having knowledge about public policy and the government in general, how things work, is really beneficial in any job, as that's actually essentially how that helps. And specifically with in relation to a private company and public policy, I think that the fact that you have knowledge about the regulatory, legal, policy environment, that's something that really helps with, a proper being able to manage a proper interaction between the firm and the consumer interaction, what's going on with the world. Because until and unless you are engaged with what's happening outside, you can't really make a difference with in what you're doing inside.
Mhm.
And other than that, a greater involvement with policy also helps you mold your research in ways that are relevant to the times and the world. Specifically, like if we see what's happening in the world right now, every single corporation in the world is trying to change according to what's happening outside. So, in terms of that, public policy is really helpful because you need to know how to manage change, how to understand consumer behavior, public behavior, and how they would change and react to whatever the firm is doing. And specifically, why I joined Unilever was because they have a really strong motto in wanting to make a meaningful and positive change in the world.
Right.
And they work with the rural area, with the rural community a lot. So so specific why I chose Unilever was because other than the fact that I can put a lot of my policy data, whatever I've learned through policy data and public policy to use there, also because they will really help me make a change, which I would have been able to in another company as well. I'm not saying that Unilever is the only one, but I think it's a great start. And there
Right.
is a lot of intersection between public policy and private firms.
So this trend of going towards a private company while learning public policy, is this a new one? And do you see an increase in this trend? Because as for me, this trend will be increasing because as private companies gain a lot of leverage in the world, they will have to interact with the government at some point of time, right? As they grow more international.
So I do think that a lot of people are joining the private sector more today than they were earlier, but that's not to say that the public sector is, not getting as many qualified people
Right.
because even out of from my batch, there are so many people who've gone to work in Niti Aayog, and a lot of people have this perception that maybe if you work as a policymaker in as a policymaker somewhere down the hierarchical ladder, you won't be able to influence the world and change making as much. But I don't think that's true. I think in today's world, if you see specifically with relation to coronavirus, Niti Aayog is literally they have all the power of policy making. And why this perception does exist amongst people like us is because when the announcements of specific policies are made, the leader comes forward and makes the announcements.
Right.
But there's so much more that goes on behind that announcement. And policymakers in the government sector have a huge role to play.
Definitely. And like it's true. So to make change, the private sector and the public sector aren't just the two avenues. You can go beyond that as well, right?
For
So
sure.
yeah. So
All
to our
these think tanks.
oh
Yeah,
sorry,
sorry.
okay. Um, so there's this really common notion and assumption that when you do research in public policy, it doesn't get traction or recognition in the government as the government is infamous for not incorporating this research into their policy making or legislature. So
Yeah.
how to what extent is that true or not true?
Um, like I said, I think this is essentially because, we see only a few faces in
Right,
the TV. We read a few names in articles and journals. But I think just the discourse on public policy has so much impact on what decisions the government uh, eventually takes. And other than the discourse, even the policy makers that are working for the government have a huge role to play in what actually does come out and what is given to the public. For example, in public policy, it's really important to see what the public mood is and
right,
how to make the best use of the window of opportunity. So these policymakers are trained to spot that window of opportunity, to sense the public mood, to be able to release a specific policy when the time is right. So
hmm,
all of those things, even though we may see a few people making the announcements about a policy, telling the people what the policy is, there's a huge chain behind that about how the policy is made, how it's analyzed,
hmm,
and when it's released into the public. So policymakers have a huge role to play, and
right.
I don't think it's true that um, the recommendations made by policymakers doesn't gain traction within the government.
Right. There's a lot that goes beyond in the backstage, right?
Exactly.
So on to the next question. What are the books, journals, articles that you read in your graduation? So as you mentioned that you had shifted from computer science to political science, and that is a very shift of magnitude. So what are the media sources or podcasts or anything that inspired you or helped in building your acumen in public policy?
So very honestly, the reason I switched was because of the professors at Ashoka University. I think you're also at Ashoka, so I think we've been really lucky with the kind of professors we have,
Definitely.
and they really made me love. I loved my first political science class, which was Intro to Pol 101. And other than that, if I have to talk about journals and articles and books that people should read, I think that's really it depends from person to person. I'm someone um, who's not a big fan of fictional reading,
Okay.
so I think one book doesn't matter what you're studying, what background you come from. One book that everyone should read is India After Gandhi,
Okay.
and
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Huh.
And that's because, I mean, it does give you facts about the history, which of course shapes a huge part of how public policy eventually comes about. But other than that, it teaches you how India changed, evolved, the growth, how it takes place. And it's a big book. It's a thick book. I'm not going to lie, but it's worth a read for sure. And I think I read it in my second year at Ashoka,
Okay.
and it took me almost the entire summer, but it was worth it.
Right.
Other than that, I think with coursework and stuff, it's really not easy to keep up with reading side by side. So I think as long as you are connected with what's happening outside in the world, I'm subscribed to The Economist. So I'm not saying that The Economist is the best, but trying to get news from neutral sources, not so most of the news today is biased in
Right.
one way or the other. So I think The Economist is not as biased. It gives you facts as they exist. So I'm subscribed to The Economist and basically just keeping up with what's happening around the world, trying to just keep up, make your own views, discuss with your friends, with your family. Like for me, discussing policies and what's happening in the world with my family is really helpful and
Mhm.
exciting because all of us have extremely different viewpoints. And that's really important to policy, to be able to see the same policy from different viewpoints and to be able to hear what the different viewpoints are. So I would say engage in conversation with people who are not like-minded, because that will really help you um, see things differently.
Hmm. I really like that point about you saying that discussing things with the people who don't share the same viewpoint as yours, because it may also get you to realize the different nuances in society and also confront your uh, your own shortcomings. Right.
Exactly, because while discussing, you also realize that, oh, maybe the point that I made didn't make that much sense. So you try and think more about it, and it just helps you think harder.
Right. And the another question would be, so you had completed your master's degree from the London School of Economics, and just like many of us, that's a dream we all of us share. So if you could speak about the experiences you had at that school and how it has helped you so far.
So I'm still doing my master's. I haven't completed it yet. I'm going to complete it in September. But other than the fact that my year and experience got cut short by almost half because of coronavirus, I think the way Ashoka prepared me for the LSE, no other school could have in terms of academics, in terms of writing, because when, for example, like when I went to the LSE, we weren't taught like at Ashoka we have we're taught how to write essays, how to critically engage with texts, but at LSE it was just you were supposed to know how to write essays. So I
Mhm.
think Ashoka really trained me well for that. And specifically in terms of the course, I think it's been really great because we were a small group of 36 people and people from all around the world. And to be able to learn about policies in different parts of the world and realize how so many of the policies are taken from other countries, how they are tweaked and molded, sometimes not even tweaked and molded, just picked up, and then uh, major disasters happen. But it's studying public policy at LSE has been great is because it's such a huge international community, and studying something like public policy in a really diverse community makes the entire degree so much more better, and it teaches you so much more than just books and lectures would have.
Right. So now backing up a little bit, so I want to speak about the internships or the work experience you've had while you were in your undergraduation. So and how those experiences have helped you build your sense of responsibility towards public policy.
So I was at Ashoka for 3 years, which means I had 2 summers. And after the first year, I was like, oh, it's okay. I've just finished my first year, so I don't need to worry too much. So I basically just danced throughout my first summer. And then the second summer, I ended up interning at two places. First was the Ministry of External Affairs, and second was the Trivedi Center for Political Data at Ashoka University. And I think both of them gave me a really different experience, but also taught me how so much of political science, public policy, government actions, decisions are interlinked. So at the MEA, I was working with the in I was working with ITech, so it's the Technical Economic Cooperation,
Mhm.
and it basically gives aid to other countries, so essentially to the SAARC countries. So those could be aid in women empowerment or teaching, um, all kinds of like thousands of different kinds of aid that they give. So essentially, what I did was see how our aid is actually being used, if it's helping them, if they are using it, if they want more aid, if they want a continued supply of however much aid is being given. So basically, see if the aid is even being put to use and if it's being helpful. So that was really helpful in terms of telling me how countries cooperate with each other.
Mhm.
And I realized that there's a lot that goes on that we don't understand. Like, so
Right.
much aid was being given, and there was absolutely no improvement in that specific part.
Mhm.
So, for example, even when it comes to women empowerment or women education, we were giving a vast amount of aid to all these countries where no improvement was happening. So there's a huge gap between what's being given and what's actually happening. So I don't know if the gap is because of implementation or lack of will. I think that's something that needs more research on.
Right.
But it was a really interesting experience for sure. And after that, I interned at TCPD where I worked with election data,
Mhm.
and I also continued working as a research assistant at TCPD after my internship completed. So it was more of a, I worked from July to December,
Right.
so almost 6 months,
Wow.
which which actually taught me how important it is to work over a longer period of time, because what you can learn slowly and by yourself over time, you can't really learn in through an internship in say 4 weeks or five
Mhm.
weeks. So at
Right.
TCPD, that's when I really started loving data and numbers. And I
Mhm.
realized that even though data gives you a lot of answers and it helps you see things more clearly, it also gives you a lot of questions.
Mhm.
Like
Right.
sometimes the data is just given to you without any filter, nothing, and it confuses you more than it gives you answers. So I think data is really interesting, and my love for data comes from there.
Right. So I think that'll be all. Thank you, Tarini.